Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my new video. My name's AJ. I'm your host for today. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and I'm going to talk about Japan today. And as you know, Japan has been in the headlines for a number of reasons, and I'm going to go through all of those reasons. And before I start talking about Japan and everything else, I would like to kind of ask you guys to don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. And also, if you can help support the channel, it really does help. It helps me do more videos, motivates me to do more videos. Because, as you know, I've been working on a new job and I'm finding it extremely difficult to do videos and working at the same time. Supporting the channel via Patreon or via locals will help me do this full time. So I kindly ask you if you can support it, that'd be great. If you cannot, don't worry. Just carry on liking, supporting, sharing the video, and try and watch the video to the end as well. It does help with the algorithm, and it helps me motivate me to create more videos for you guys. So without further ado, let's carry on with the show. So Russia's Medvedev recently accused Japan of being a shameful subservience to the US. And I got to agree with him very much so. Japan has been a very loyal dog to the United States, and that's just saying it mildly. I don't want to be insulting the Japanese too much, but you really got to look at your leaders and what they're doing. They are putting Japan on the front line in a war against China in the near future, on the front line. And they will use every single last Japanese to fight China, just as they are fighting Russia with every single last Ukrainian. Do the Japanese people really want this? I don't think so. So let's continue. So Japan recently approved a major defense overhaul, and they are going to be spending up to 2% of its GDP by 2027 to reshape its military. They're going to be also doing long-range missiles, and they're also going to be working on a new island as well, which they're going to be militarizing, which is not far from the island of Taiwan. So just to give you a contrast, China's defense budget is only 1.3% of its GDP. And you're welcome to check this out. You might say to yourself, hang on a second, but China's been building all these ships and airplanes. They got a huge military budget. It's not it's not really we can't really trust that numbers and stuff. Yeah, sure. You can say that about every single country. You can say that about the US. And you can say that about Japan as well, because Japan has been spending a lot of its budget hosting US military guys in Okinawa. They have up to 50,000 US troops in Okinawa and other places around Japan as well. And the funny thing is, Japan is paying for most of it. A couple of years ago, United States went up to Japan and said, look, we want more money for hosting troops at your islands. And Japan said, yeah, why not? Here's more money. Keep more troops. Bring more in if you have to. So think about it this way, right? This is like the US Army invading my own house with no approval, having US troops sleeping at my bed, and I'm having to pay for them. Does that make sense? Of course it doesn't. And this is exactly what Japan is doing with the United States right now. And they are such a loyal dog to the United States. They have agreed to every single thing that the United States wanted ever since the Second World War. I have to go back to history. We can talk about the time when Japan was rising, and the United States put a stop to it all by getting Japan to sign the Plaza Accord, which completely stagnated the economy. They have not grown ever since that time. And you can talk about all of the sanctions they've placed on Russia regards to the war in Ukraine, and they've been absolutely subservient. They've joined the Chip 4, they've joined the Quad, they've joined every single anti-China group or organization there is. And they have been saying yes to the United States at almost every turn. It's almost shameful. It's almost shameful to watch them be so subservient to the West. And I just can't believe once proud nation have become such loyal dogs to the West. I want to take you back a bit further when Japan was number one, and you see all of these articles, even Donald Trump, you can see in this picture, saying that Japan is the enemy, they're taking away American jobs, and there was a huge anti-Japanese sentiment at the time, very similar to the very much anti-Chinese sentiment we have today. And you can see all of these movies and books and all these articles were coming out at the time, very anti-Japanese. Japanese people were being beaten up in the streets. Japan was being humiliated. And yet, ever since then, Japan is still subservient to the West, and it just doesn't make any sense. It's almost like they have absolutely bullied Japan into submissive. Or maybe they like being punished. You know what you call those those S&M people, where one person likes to give the punishment and the other one likes to receive them. I can't remember the full name actually. It'll come to me eventually. But you can see, very much lots of anti-Japanese violence at the time that was going on. The guy you see on the screen was basically beaten up and killed, and the guys who killed him didn't even serve any jail time. It was absolutely ridiculous. The anti-Japanese sentiment was really bad back in those days. And they also targeted a lot of companies as well. Toshiba was the company they attacked the most. And it was like the Huawei of today. And there has been other companies they attacked as well, Sony, Mitsubishi, many other Japanese companies they tried to sanction and destroy. And yet, you have to also think about some of these other images where politicians were breaking all of these Toshiba items. And, that woman there looks like Nancy Pelosi, if you look at it closely. And you can see they were very much so anti-Japanese back in the day. If you were growing up in the 80s and 90s, you will see all of these anti-Japanese stuff. And it's exactly the same thing is happening now with the Chinese. After September 11th, it was all the Muslims. After the Ukraine war, now it's all the Russians. It will never change. United States will find an enemy, and that's what it is. It's like a Hollywood movie. You are the enemy, we are the good guys, and it's always been that case. And they try and portray people like the absolute enemy, like the Saddam was likened to Hitler, and now they're saying Putin is worse than Hitler. It's just they like to paint an enemy, and they want to be the good guy. They want to be the one going in saving the day, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And the headlines back in those days very much mirror the same headlines you see targeted at China. You can see here, Japan buys US with our money. This is exactly what they're saying about China. China is buying US with their money, and they're taking US's jobs and all sorts of stuff. So you can see, history is kind of repeating itself. Japan were then asked to sign the Plaza Accord at the time in 1982. And you can see how the Japanese yen just collapsed. This is the Japan US foreign exchange rate. And since then, the Japanese economy has never ever recovered. They have been pretty much stagnant throughout all of these years. And they've never said anything. Let's not even mention the two atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan as well by the United States. Their so-called friend didn't even apologize. And I'm going back to this article as well. Russia's Medvedev accuses Japan of shameful subservience. And Russia's Medvedev, clearly says, you can see here, he said the paranoia towards Russia and betrayed the memory of hundreds and thousands of Japanese who were burnt in the nuclear fire of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a reference to the atomic bombs the United States dropped on Japan to force its surrender at the end of World War II. Rather than demanding US repentance for this, Kishida has shown he was just a service attendant for the Americans. And you can see, the Japanese don't really talk about all of these nuclear bombs dropped into their country. And it just beggars beyond belief. They have been beaten to be so submissive. It's almost like, when you see a bully bullying some guy, and some guy is obviously standing up for himself in the beginning, trying to act tough, but the bully beats him up so much that at the end of the week, that guy he was beating up, he's become completely subservient to the bully. He's like, yes, sir, whatever you say, sir. How much money do you want, sir? Take me, whatever you want, sir. And this is what's happened to Japan. They have been absolutely beaten to submission. They have no sovereign right of their own. They have no sovereignty. This is beyond embarrassing. This is beyond embarrassing. At least the Chinese and the Russians are standing up for themselves. You can't really say they're subservient or to the Americans. I mean, what the Japanese are doing is absolute embarrassment. Absolute embarrassment. So you have Germany as well. Germany was a major subservient to the US until recently. Now they're starting to fight back, not giving any tanks to Ukraine. And all of the West is shocked. They're like, oh my God, Germany is not giving any tanks to Ukraine. How could they? How could they? Oh my God. And the whole world's giving Germany so much pressure. If they said that to the Japanese, give us 10 tanks, Japan would be like, yeah, sure, sir, why not, sir? Take all of them if you want. It's absolutely ridiculous how the Japan has become like this over the years. Yeah, it absolutely beggars belief, guys, beggars belief. So Japan has recently signed a deal with Britain. And I just found this article absolutely hilarious. Britain and Japan plan large-scale military drills to deter China and Russia. I mean, come on, guys. Have you seen the size of China and Russia? And have you seen the size of Chinese and Russian military might together? And now they're saying that Britain and Japan are going to join forces to deter China. I mean, this is like Congo and Afghanistan joining forces to deter the United States. I mean, come on, Britain. Oh God! I'm not even gonna talk about this. And by the way, I'm gonna make another video. Rishi has recently been caught, you know, with not wearing a seatbelt in a car, and he's making a TikTok video or something, and he's not wearing a seatbelt, and he recently got fined by the police. And this guy, Dodgy Rishi, I mean, how can this guy even run a country? He really hasn't got a clue. He's got his hands full with strikes going on. Strikes are crippling the whole economy in United Kingdom. He's gone missing, and he's got time to make these TikTok videos. I mean, I don't know how long he's going to stay in power, but I can tell you, not very long by the sounds of it. Japan is also building up this military base. And again, you see everything is against China. Everything is against China. So let me tell you something. In a front line, in a war over Taiwan Island, for example, Japan is going to be used like Ukraine is being used against Russia. Japan is going to be used as a front line deterrent against China, and they're going to be cannon fodder against China. I mean, China, yeah, have you seen the size of China and the size of Chinese military might and manufacturing might? They can easily turn all of these hundreds and thousands of factories they have all across China, they can easily turn them into missile and bomb making factories overnight if they wanted to. And look at the population compared to China, compared to Japan. Look at China's military compared to Japan. You know, Japan doesn't have a chance in hell. Add Russia into the mix because Japan is also having issues with Russia regards to some island disputes as well. So, and Russia and China are doing joint military drills with ships and airplanes together. So, as China and Russia get closer and closer together, Japan is more or less isolating itself. I mean, why is Japan doing all of this? On one hand, they are complete bitches to the United States. On the other hand, they feel like they are the imperial Japanese, the top dogs, the top Asians. China is the poor man of Asia. You know, I remember watching a lot of martial art films when I was younger, and one of the films, I think it was called The Big Boss or something, where a Japanese guy walks into the dojo and he has a big sign with him. And on the sign it says China is the sick man of Asia at the time. And the Japanese were looking down on the Chinese, you know, calling them the sick man of Asia. And, you know, they had these, you know, they were always like looking down on the Chinese. And that film where Bruce Lee fights back against Japanese and Japanese imperialism was a great film. I really enjoyed it. And I was like, yeah, kick these asses of these you know, imperialist invaders and stuff. And I thought it was a great film. And probably, you know, in Japan, a lot of them still have the same mentality because Japan is a country full of old people, right? Their population is going down. They're not having babies anymore. So a lot of the Japanese are still old and they are from that old generation, imperialistic generation. And probably a lot of them still think Japan, you know, China is still the poor man of Asia. And so they act different towards China while they act completely different to the West. You know, they are completely subservient to the West. While with China, they feel like they are still the boss. I mean, this is my opinion. So they probably still feel that they can win a war against China, and this is why they have increased their military budget to 2%, and they probably feel that they can win against China. Well, this is not the time when Japan was the imperialistic country taking over all of the Asian countries. I'm talking about at the time when they took over a lot of, you know, parts of China, took over Korea, took over even the island of Taiwan, Philippines, and many other places around Southeast Asia. And the crimes that Japan did over those years were inhumane, and we're talking about genocide of people. You know, the crimes they did against China, it will never be forgotten. They used Chinese as guinea pigs in a lab to do experiments on. They actually did real genocide against the Chinese. They did lots of other horrific acts throughout Asia as well. So they are a country that is not very liked in Asia. And trust me, if there is a war that breaks out, who do you think most of the Asian countries would side with? They're not going to side with Japan because they are aware of all of the historic stuff that's happened between the two countries. Even South Korea, supposed to be an ally, even they don't like Japan. They have a huge trade war between them. You know, they're not even talking between themselves. And so Japan thinks that they can win a war against China. I mean, this is absolutely laughable. So Japan's going to increase its military budget to 2%. You know, China still has a military budget of 1.3% of its GDP. What do you think will happen if China decides to increase its military budget to 2%? Can you imagine how much more ships and how much more air, you know, fifth generation airplanes would be produced by that extra percentage of GDP. Japan is in danger of starting arms race in Asia, and for them to have all of these weapons, increasing their military budget to 2%, this is only making them a target, not just from China itself, but other countries as well. North Korea don't really like Japan as well, and many other countries don't like Japan. And don't forget Russia. Russia and Japan are still at odds with sanctions. Japan has placed sanctions on Russia, so Russia do not like them, and they have issues with some islands at the north of Japan, which Russia also claims. So there's issues. Japan is literally isolating itself. The only way forward would have been just to be peaceful with all your neighbors. But this is Japan going back to its imperialistic roots and trying to cause trouble. And trust me, China would love for Japan to get involved in a war over Taiwan. They would love it because with all of the crimes that Japan did to China, China would love to pay back everything that Japan did to them. And we're talking about a lot of atrocities Japan did to China, and they're still not apologized for them. And trust me, China would love for Japan to be involved in a war. They would literally blow Japan out of the water. The amount of missiles they have pointing at Japan, amount of missiles, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of missiles that could land in Japan in hours. Japan would not have a chance. No chance. And don't forget, China's got long-range missiles. Japan has not got any long-range missiles. Obviously they're going to be building some long-range missiles with this new military doctrine, but they're not going to make enough. China has been making these long-range missiles for years, for decades. And plus, China's got nuclear weapons. Obviously, nuclear weapons will probably not be used, but they don't need to use nuclear weapons against Japan. Even the conventional military would be too much for Japan to take. So if you think about it for a second, Japan is in a very, very tight spot. It's an island. It's not like Ukraine, where you can ship weapons through the Polish borders and things like that. To supply Japan, you have to supply it through the sea. So it's not going to be easy in a war situation. If Japan runs out of missiles, they can't import or get anything else from other countries because if they came near Japan, they would be simply blown out of the water. And a lot of people don't realize this, but one of the main reasons Japan lost in World War II is not because of the two atomic bombs dropping on its head, but another very important reason. Japan was completely, you know, blocked from oil and gas being delivered into Japan. So they did not have any industry for the military. They didn't have any energy for the military to run. Like they didn't have any oil for their ships. They didn't have any oil for their airplanes. So the whole country was at a standstill because America had blocked all of the routes supplying oil and other natural resources to Japan. So Japan had no choice but to unconditionally surrender. They had literally no choice. So the United States is planning to do the same thing to China, but unfortunately China is not Japan, and China has other routes they're gonna get their oil and gas and other things from, mainly through Russian pipelines and Russian railway lines and links to Iran and Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, BRI. They have many other options available to them, and this is one of the reasons China is building its Belt and Road scheme. Japan has no such Belt and Road scheme. They are still an island. So it's very easy for China to choke Japan, the same way that United States choked Japan in the World War II. They would literally block any oil and gas shipments going into Japan, and Russia would do the same. They would help China in that situation. They would not supply Japan with any oil and gas during wartime. So the only other country that can supply Japan with oil and gas will be United States. However, they'll have to come via sea, And as you know, they are going to be within reach of Chinese hypersonic missiles or submarines. They'll be completely blown out the water. So Japan, there is no way in hell Japan would win in any sorts of war with China. Not in a million years. You know, you have to be an absolutely bonkers to believe that Japan would win this war. And the United States knows that. And the United States would use Japan for every single last Japanese to fight the Chinese. And they will do the same they are doing with the Ukrainians. They will fight till every single last Ukrainians. You've seen the amount of killings that's being done in Bakhmut and Solidar. You know, we're talking about just the last 2 weeks alone. You know, we're talking about tens of thousands of Ukrainians being killed trying to protect Bakhmut and trying to protect Solidar. And they're going to be doing the same thing with the Japanese. They're going to be trying to, you know, help this island of Taiwan with every single last Japanese they can find. And they will do it. They will do it to every single last Japanese. They don't really care about the Japanese. And you've seen from the earlier version of the video, you've seen what the Americans think of the Japanese. They hate them ever since the 1980s, and you've seen the articles. The same thing they're doing to the Chinese, they did it to Japan. So don't pretend that they love the Japanese. The Japanese are different. They have been beaten into submission. Doesn't mean they like the Japanese. They still hate them. They still think they're the Asian peril or the yellow peril. So the Japanese are being very stupid by increasing their military budget. They are putting themselves as a target, and the Chinese know that. They will be putting Japan as the main target if any war breaks out. And things are not looking good for Japan at all. However, this is the least of Japan's problems, by the way. One of the main problems is Japan has become a nation of old people. The Japanese are not having any more babies, and they can't, because Japanese are absolutely overworked. If you go to Japan, the Japanese work, like crazy. They wake up in the morning, they work long hours, 12-hour shifts. They go home, they get something to eat, go to bed, and next morning they're back to work again. They haven't got time for relationships. They haven't got time for marriage. They haven't got time to make babies. And now the single women of Japan, they want the same thing as well. They want to be independent. They want to make money. They want a career. They want to work. So even the women don't have time for babies. And this is the same thing happening throughout the world, but it's happening more in Japan and also in South Korea. Some might say it's starting to happen in China as well, but that's another story. The fact of the matter is, Japan's population is due to go to around 80 million by 2050. 80 million. Do you know how many? Do you know in terms of population, 80 million is the size of two cities in China, two main cities, let's say Beijing and Chongqing, for example. Chongqing has a population of 30 million, and Beijing has a population of, I think, 30 to 40 million, you would say, give and take. But yeah, you can see, and China's got hundreds and hundreds of cities which are more than 10 million each. So you can see China's population is dwarfing Japanese population, and you might say, "Oh, China's population is going down as well." But if you look at the actual numbers, guys, look at the actual numbers. China's population has gone down by 800,000 by the latest census, according to some facts. But if you look at Japanese census, they have lost a population of 564,000. And if you compare the population of Japan to the population of China, in terms of, per capita, Japan's population is going down much faster than China. And the West has got this problem as well. But one of the ways the West um, gets over this problem is letting migrants in. So the United States has been letting in so many migrants over the years through the southern border. They come into the United States. They, make babies, etc., and that, brings up the population. Lots of people emigrate to the United States in search of the great dream. They want to be rich and successful, so they go to United States. Unfortunately, they most of them end up being homeless. And you know, there's a stark contrast between the West and the rest of the world. And even the UK, our population has been going down for years, but only thing bringing it up is the mass migrations of illegal immigrants and things like that. But the rich people, people with money in United Kingdom, they're the ones that are leaving. We have had a huge exodus of people leaving the country, the ones with money. Lots of Russians have been leaving as well. Lots of Dubaians, Saudi Arabians have been leaving. Lots of Chinese have been leaving United Kingdom. So all the people with money and got some status in society, they're leaving, and they're being replaced by these illegal immigrants who want basically a handout from the government. So there's a big contrast here. And and obviously it's not just a problem with Japan, it's a problem throughout society right now because women do not want to have babies anymore. Women want a career, women want to work, and rightly so. I'm not against women working or having a career and stuff, but this is the way society is right now compared to what it was like 50 years ago when women were happy to stay at home, look after the kids while the men were going out making money. And it was like that during, you know, the boom years of the United States, where they had loads of factories in the 60s, 70s, and this is when the middle class grew in the United States, and middle class were basically consisted of a father figure who was going out to work, and the mother would stay at home looking after her kids and raising them and stuff like that. And the father would make enough for the family, and then the middle class would rise. Unfortunately, things are not the same in this society anymore. You need an average person um, cannot buy a home in United Kingdom anymore. You need to be married, and you both need to be earning over 100,000 or thereabouts to basically afford a place in London. And things have gone so expensive in London. Even if a man is married, he cannot look after his wife and child with his salary. And so the wife has to go out and work as well, and they have to kind of get someone else to look after the kid. And this is the way society is. Things have gone so expensive in the West that, women can't afford the luxury of being at home anymore. They have to go out and work to support themselves, support the family, support the husband. And if this husband loses the job, then, it's up to the wife as well. There's other issues as well. The Japanese yen has been falling against the dollar, which means this is bad for Japanese economy for many reasons. Number one, they are a huge importer of natural gas and oil, so they have to pay more for these natural resources because the dollar is getting more expensive and the yen is falling. And because the dollar is the petrodollar, and if you buy it from Saudi Arabia, for example, or the United States, you got to pay in dollars. And then Japan is like situated in an island, so you have to look at the distance between Middle East to Japan. It's huge, absolutely huge. So the cost of oil delivered from Middle East to Japan is going to be huge. And even coming from the United States to Japan, you got to cross the Pacific Ocean, and even that is not cheap. They're not getting much oil from Russia because of the sanctions. So things are becoming very, very bad in Japan right now. Recently, they had an inflation hit of 4%. You might think 4% is not much compared to the West. West is having inflation between 10 and 20%, even more in some areas. However, 4% in Japan is a big deal because they have been running interest rates zero or minus for decades now. They have been having like minus in percent in interest rates, and their prices have been falling rather than rising over the years. And and it's become an absolute shock to the Japanese now. You know, the prices of everything has been rising, inflation has been rising, even though their interest rates are very much low and, you know, even minus at some areas. The people are shocked. And the difference is Japan is in a very, very tight position. They cannot do anything about it. They cannot raise interest rates like the United States or Europe or Great Britain. They cannot do that because Japan is the most excuse me, Japan is the most heavily indebted country in the world. And you can see here, Japan's debt to GDP ratio is 264%. And this is said by the IMF. And this is the highest in the world. So if they increase the interest rates by 1%, the Japan economy would absolutely collapse because, you know, the businesses in Japan who've been used to having 0% or minus percent interest rates for years now suddenly will have to pay interest on their loans. And the debt to GDP ratio, 264%, imagine how much, you know, interest they would have to pay, even if it goes up by 1%. It would absolutely collapse the Japanese economy overnight. So it's not interest rates, it's not something they have the luxury of playing around with. So there's another story here where Japan is looking to release radioactive water into the sea this year, and this is cause a lot of issues around Pacific Islands, China, South Korea, Philippines, and many other Asian countries who are completely against Japan doing this. However, United States and Blinken are completely in support of Japan doing this. And one, Chinese minister came up with a statement when Blinken said, "Oh, we're happy for Japan to do this," and he said, "Why doesn't Blinken drink some of that radioactive water himself?" And United States is happy for Japan to do this because when Japan released these waters into the sea, these waters are not near United States. If it was near United States, then things would be different. However, there have been studies that within the next 5 or 10 years, some of these radioactive waters will reach the United States, and things will be very, very different then. However, the Chinese are completely against this, and there's no knowing what the Chinese would do when Japan actually released this water, radioactive water into the sea. China will not take it lightly, and I would probably estimate that China would probably place some heavy sanctions on Japan when this happens. So, what do you think of Japan acting this way? Are Japan looking at pressing a self destruct button with their aggressive stance towards China? Do you agree with Medvedev, with Japan being a shameful subservient to the United States? Let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot, guys. See you soon.